Language shift happens when a community slowly stops using their native language and start using another language more often. This usually happens in multilingual societies where more powerful or dominant languages are used in education, government, and media. Over time, minority languages become less relevant in daily life. One of the main groups affected by language shift is immigrant communities. When people migrate to a new country, they adopt the dominant language to adapt to their new environment. For example, many Indian Tamils in Malaysia start by speaking Tamil at home, but over generations, their children and grandchildren often prefer Malay or English, especially if they attend national schools. Younger generations are usually the first to shift. Children are more influenced by school, friends, and social media. If their parents don't reinforce the use of the mother tongue at home, the children will naturally become more fluent in the dominant language. A good example is Chinese children in urban areas who may understand dialects like Hokkien or Cantonese but mostly speak English. Urbanization also plays a major role. When people move to cities, they are surrounded by dominant languages in daily activities like at work, in shops, and in public spaces. For instance, orang asli who move from rural villages to urban areas often stop using their indigenous language and switch to Malay to blend in and be understood. Education and mass media add to this shift. Schools usually use national or global languages like Malay or English, and so do TV shows, online content, and books. This reduces the chance for young people to use their native languages. Over time, these languages are spoken less and less. Eventually, if a language is not passed down to younger generations, it can disappear entirely. This is known as language death. Many indigenous languages in Sabah and Sarawak, for example, are at risk because the younger generation no longer speaks them.
Now moving on to language death and loss. Language death refers to the complete disappearance of a language when it is no longer spoken by any individuals. A notable example of this is the Ubykh language, which became extinct after the last fluent speaker passed away in 1992. Another example is Ayapaneco, a language spoken in Mexico. Although two elderly speakers remain, they no longer communicate with each other, and as a result, the language is on the verge of extinction. In contrast, language loss occurs gradually when the use of a language declines over time. This usually happens as speakers shift to using another language. A clear example of language loss is the Mapuche language in Chile. The younger generations increasingly prioritize Spanish, seeing it as a more practical language for education and career opportunities. And as a result, fewer individuals are learning and speaking Mapuche, causing the language to lose its speaker gradually. Several factors contribute to both language death and loss. Firstly, social factors are a significant driver. When a dominant language, such as Spanish, in the case of Mapuche communities, becomes more widely used and associated with prestige, social mobility, and better opportunities, younger generations often begin to adopt the dominant language. This preference causes a shift away from the native language. Secondly, cultural erosion plays a crucial role. When a language is no longer used in daily life or informal settings, it begins to lose its richness and complexity. The Djarbal language, spoken by an indigenous group in Australia, is an example of this phenomenon. Younger speakers, such as Ani, struggle to recall many words and grammatical structures because the language is no longer actively used, leading to its gradual decline. Lastly, colonialism has been a historical factor in the loss of many indigenous language. Colonial powers such as Spain in South America or Britain in Australia often imposed their language on the local populations. This led to the marginalization and eventual disappearance of many indigenous language and cultures.
How can a minority language be maintained? A minority language can be maintained by intergenerational transmission. One of the strongest ways to maintain a language is for parents and elders to speak it regularly with their children. When a language is used as the first language at home, it continues to live naturally through generations. For example, the Tumia people in Perak and Kelantan often speak their native language at home, ensuring that children grow up fluent in it despite dominant languages around them. Next, positive language attitudes. If speakers are proud of their language and associate it with identity, heritage, or tradition, they are more likely to keep using it and pass it on. For example, many Chinese Malaysians have a strong sense of cultural identity tied to Mandarin, Hokkien, and Cantonese, which motivates them to maintain these languages at home and community events. Moving on to the next point, a minority language can also be maintained by strong community networks. When minority language speakers live closely and interact daily in their own language, like in villages, neighborhoods, or community hubs, it strengthens language use and reduces shift. For example, Tamil-speaking communities in rural estates and certain neighborhoods in Klang Valley maintain the use of Tamil through daily conversations, shops, and religious gatherings. Institutional support is also crucial in maintaining minority language. When schools, religious bodies, or media use the language, it gains formal recognition and more opportunities for use. For instance, vernacular schools like SJK, Tamil and Chinese offer full instruction in minority languages, helping children learn to read, write, and speak them formally. There also should be culture and symbolic importance for a multi-language to maintain. A language that holds deep cultural meaning or is tied to tradition, rituals, or identity is often preserved with passion by its speaker. For example, the Iban language in Sarawak is actively preserved because it's a core part of traditional dances, music like ngajat, and oral storytelling passed down through generations. Next, there should be a resistance to language shift in order for a minority language to be maintained. Language shift occurs when speakers abandon their native language in favor of dominant one. Active resistance means continuing to speak the minority language even when social or economic pressures push towards Malay or English. We can see this scenario happens in Malaysia, especially in Sabah. Kadazan Dusun families and cultural groups promote the use of their native tongue at home and in events to resist the dominance of Malay in public life. Literacy and media plays a big role in maintaining a minority language. When a language appears in books, online content, music, or media, it stays visible and functional for younger generation. For instance, indigenous communities in Sabah and Sarawak are beginning to publish content in YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok in Bajau or Nun Bawang, helping younger speakers engage with the language digitally. Next, active language planning and policy can also help in maintaining minority language. Governments or language advocates can take steps like funding programs, creating learning materials, and documenting the language to protect and promote it. For example, Sarawak's Ministry of Education has explored, including Iban and Bidayuh in the school curriculum, and some NGOs work on documenting endangered languages with the help of Dewan Bahasa and Pusaka. Last but not least, a minority language can be maintained by using it in various domains. A language is more likely to survive if it's used not just at home, but in education, workplaces, media, religion, and public signage. For example, we can see in Chinese majority towns like Ipoh, Hakka is spoken not only in homes, but also in temples, shops, and even some schools, keeping it active across social settings.
Now, let's look at the 7 main factors contributing to language shift. Let's begin with migration. When people move to new areas, particularly for work or safety, they often find themselves surrounded by a dominant language. In order to integrate socially and economically, they adopt that language. This shift often happens over generation. As families settle in their new home, the younger generation may stop speaking the heritage language altogether and fully embrace the new language. It's a common occurrence in global cities where being able to communicate in the dominant language is crucial for survival and success. Next is Infiltration. This occurs when small groups of people move into a new community and over time influence the local language through everyday interactions. This can be through word trade or even friendships. The language of these small groups can begin to blend with the local language, especially if the new language is more widely spoken or considered more prestigious. Over time, this can lead to the adoption of the more dominant language, shifting the language dynamics of the community. Another key factor is diffusion. This happens when a language spreads without the need for physical migration. It can occur through media, education, and now digital platforms like the internet, TV, and even video games. A great example is the spread of English in India during colonial times. English didn't spread because of settlers, but through schools and government institutions. Nowadays, global media and online platforms play a huge role in spreading dominant language across the world.
The fourth factor is economic and educational opportunities. So people often shift to a dominant language because it helps them acquire jobs or access better education. Parents may stop teaching their native language to their kids if they believe that the dominant one offers more chances for success in their life. Hence why minority language get left behind in daily use. Moving on to the fifth factor that contributes to language shift is intermarriage and bilingual families. So in families where parents speak different languages, they often pick one main language for communication, usually the more dominant or useful one. For example, mixed families such as Spanish men and indigenous women in Latin America created homes where the dominant language, which is Spanish, became the main language passed down. And children may grow up speaking only that particular language and lose connection to the minority one over time. The sixth factor is language prestige and social status. Languages that are seen as modern, educated, or international are often more attractive, especially to younger generations. If a local language is seen as old-fashioned or not useful, people may stop using it to fit in or to feel more successful. Thus, why youth shift to dominant languages for societal acceptance. So according to Oslo 2011, language shift may happen because people aspire to belong to a more dominant or prestigious social group. This desire can lead to adopting the group's language and abandoning the native one. Moving on to the last factor that contributes to language shift is government and education policies. So when schools and governments only used one official language back in the days, other languages were often ignored or even punished if used. This can cause people to stop speaking their native language, especially in countries with a history of colonization or language suppression.
Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about something meaningful, language revival. So, what is it? Language revival is an attempt to reverse the decline of a language or even to bring back a language that's gone extinct. This process is also commonly referred to as a language revitalization. It happens when a community becomes aware that their language is in danger and they decide to take action to save it. Language isn't just a way to communicate. It carries our history, culture, and identity. So, when a language disappears, a piece of that identity is lost too. That's why language revival is so important. It's not just about saving words, it's about keeping cultures alive. Let's take a closer look to a real-life example of language revival, the story of Welsh. The story of Welsh is also interesting. Welsh was a flourishing language in the 19th century. It has survived well as the heir language in a diglossia situation where the ruling elite used English for administration. Even industrialization in the 19th century initially supported the language, since it provided work for the Welsh speakers in the coal mining valleys. In the 19th century, Welsh was still widely spoken and used in daily life, especially in coal mining areas, where it continued to thrive even through industrialization. In fact, by 1840, over two-thirds of the population spoke Welsh, but fast forward to the 1980s and only 20% of people were still using it. So, what happened? Language erosion began when English-speaking industrialists moved into Wales, bringing English with them. Then, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, many Welsh-speaking miners left the country to find work elsewhere. At the same time, English started to dominate in public domains like schools, businesses, and government, especially in South Wales. All of these factors led to a major decline in the number of Welsh speakers. Despite the decline, Welsh communities didn't give up. There were conscious and determined efforts to slow down the loss of the language and even bring it back. One of the biggest steps was the launch of a Welsh language TV channel, which gave people more exposure to the language through media. Another major strategy was the creation of bilingual education systems, starting from preschools and continuing all the way to university. In many schools, they used the immersion methods, where subjects like science and maths are taught in Welsh. The goal wasn't just to teach the language, but to use it as a medium of instruction, so children naturally learn it by living it every day. These efforts paid off. In urban areas like Cardiff, where Welsh hasn't traditionally been spoken, there's been a rise in young people speaking Welsh, and more parents are choosing to send their kids to Welsh medium schools, helping to keep the language alive for the next generation. Despite the decline, even with all the progress, new challenges are now emerging. Many families from England, both poor and wealthy, have been moving into Wales, either for lower living costs or a better lifestyle. But not all of these families see values in their children learning Welsh. Some prefer to stick with English, which can limit the success of bilingual education programs. This shift in attitude is important because it can undermine the efforts made by Welsh communities to revive the language. At the same time, economic changes like job availability and housing also play a role in shaping how often and where a language is used. So, what we can learn from all this? Language revival isn't just about teaching grammar or words. It relies on a strong sense of community and supportive social condition. That's all, and thank you.